Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or a very good day to you when and wherever you're listening from, and a very warm welcome to the show. I'm your host, Simon Laurie King, and this is the Slick Podcast.
You have tuned in for a Slick Podcast. I'm here to seek the truth. Live from Scotland around the UK. The one and only Slick Podcast. Enjoy the show. Can I ask important questions? No matter how bizarre the truth might be. Tune in for Slick Podcast. Keeping it real, keeping it groovy.
Coming up on today's show, I'll be discussing CBD oil and its uses in today's society, as well as the taboo subject of cannabis legalisation or decriminalisation in Britain. My guest joining me today is Liam O'Dowd from the online magazine Leafie. Leafie's stance is to look at humanity's changing relationship with substances like the widely available CBD oil and cannabis generally. They in no way endorse substance abuse or breaking the law, but strongly advocate advancement in research and a positive change in society's outlook on this plant and its many uses. So without further delay, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Liam O'Dowd to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get the ball rolling on this one. Please tell us about the organisation Leafie and its mission and your association with it.
Okay, so Leafie started a couple of years ago. So 2019, we launched around March time. And the idea behind Leafie originally was to create a kind of online magazine that was talking positively about the impact and the effects of CBD. That, you know, CBD was an emerging market at the time. And it was kind of a personal journey. So my friend and I basically decided to go into business together, and we wanted to get into the CBD industry. We looked at launching a CBD brand, but we decided against that. But the kind of reason that, I mean, for personally, I wanted to get into the CBD industry was I'd got my dad onto CBD to help with an illness, and it was the outcome was really positive. But the information that I needed to make that decision and to convince him to try CBD, at the time, a lot of information was buried in either medical journals or it was on what you would call, you know, I'm not being disparaging to these guys, but kind of like stoner blogs. So, you know, guys in bedrooms, maybe talking about cannabis from a pro-legislation point of view. But the idea with Leafie was we wanted to create a website that was like a glossy magazine that took hard to find or hard to understand medical information and digest that and put it into a format that people could understand. But not only that they could understand, that they could share with people who weren't necessarily pro-cannabis or you know, had maybe negative opinions about cannabis. And by kind of making it more user-friendly, we were trying to break that link between the stigma of what was, you know, perceived to be, you know, a bad substance and, you know, the potential health benefits of CBD. So we launched, as I say, 2019, and really last year, I think we really started to get some traction and we've started to build a community and audience. And now we've branched out into talking about cannabis, but more positively, and also a little bit about culture and kind of psychedelic drugs, which are, you know, is another subject in its entirety. My role at the organisation is I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm also kind of an accidental editor. So I've kind of become the position where I get sent pictures from external writers. I deal with our regular writers, and I kind of have an influence on the overall kind of direction of the subject matter that we publish. And I have to, you know, kind of go through and edit for clarity, typos, and that kind of thing. So it's a wide-reaching job. I still do some of the kind of back-end stuff as well, because I've got a bit of a tech and marketing background. So I'm kind of on the ball when it comes to making adjustments to the back end. But yeah, predominantly my role now with Leafie is to guide the content and to, you know, kind of make sure that we're publishing stuff that's unbiased, that's medically researched and backed up by, you know, reputable studies. And also that's entertaining and interesting. So yeah, that's my job in a nutshell.
Just define for me, for all of us, what CBD actually is.
Okay, so in layman's terms, CBD stands for cannabidiol, and it is one of numerous, I mean, I think we're into the hundreds now of cannabinoids, which are compounds within the cannabis and the hemp plant. And CBD oil, essentially, what people have done is they've bred the hemp plant or the cannabis plant, whichever you want to call it, to have more of this cannabinoid to be dominant within the plant. So when you think about cannabis, most people, when they think about cannabis, they think of the high that comes with it, and that's from THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. So CBD is people say non-psychoactive, but it depends on your definition of a psychoactive substance. But essentially, CBD is a compound within the hemp plant or within the cannabis plant that is beneficial for health. So, I could go on for hours about this, but we have a system in our body called the endocannabinoid system, and that is a system which, in very simple terms, regulates your body's kind of level of homeostasis. And our bodies produce cannabinoids. So our bodies produce the cannabinoids that are found within the cannabis plant naturally. They're called endocannabinoids. But what happens is we kind of have an imbalance or a deficiency in some of these. And by taking CBD, it kind of regulates the ECS, and that kind of the ECS communicates between the kind of nervous system, the immune system, etc. So essentially what CBD is also what CBD oil, or kind of consumer CBD as people would know it from, what they see on the shelves in shops and see available online, is it's a compound that is within the plant. It can be isolated on its own, or you can buy oils or products which are called either full or broad spectrum. And they have kind of other cannabinoids, sometimes a trace amount of THC, but not enough to kind of give you a kind of a high or a kind of to get you stoned basically. And so CBD oil generally has either isolated CBD or CBD along with many of the other cannabinoids and terpenes, which are an essential part of the plant. And by consuming these, you are essentially giving your body a kind of something that is deficient in. The way that the CBD interacts with the body is quite complicated, and I don't want to kind of go down the scientific route of getting into that. But yeah, CBD, it's essentially a health food supplement, as it is sold. And it is beneficial for many people, and it can be used for a range of symptoms or conditions, many of which, in my opinion, are symptoms of kind of the way we live our modern lives. So stress, anxiety, aches and pains, and many other things.
Yeah, I must admit that CBD oil, I've looked into this. Yeah, everything from anxiety. I read an article. I cross-referenced it, so I didn't just take that as gospel. A few articles said that patients recovering from chemotherapy find great benefit in taking CBD oil. So my question to you is that just one particular type of CBD oil, or would it be just across the board?
Yeah, it's a funny one, CBD, because obviously I think in the last kind of year or so, we've seen a lot of media hype. So, when we first started in this world, there wasn't as many people talking about it. And then kind of within a year, it was getting picked up by the national press. Celebrities were endorsing it. And so there was a lot of hype around what CBD can and can't do. But what we are seeing and have been seeing over the past kind of, years is a lot of research being done into what CBD can and can't do. And so, from the perspective of Leafie and what we get people reading a lot of and asking questions about I would say the main things that people probably come to our website to learn about are things like anxiety, pain. So that pain can be kind of, chronic pain or long-term conditions and suffering with pain, but also sports recovery. And that's kind of one area where a lot of people are taking CBD. So, if you're lifting heavy weights or running or cycling or rugby, rugby seems to have a real big uptake. So anxiety, pain, and sleep is another one that a lot of people are kind of keen to kind of consume CBD for. You will see a lot of people, or you'll see a lot of hype around, CBD can do X, Y, and Z, and then you'll see a lot of counterclaims. And again, we could go into a good 2 hours of why that exists. It could be that people are missold products. It could be that the strength isn't right. It could be the method of consumption or delivery. But yeah, generally speaking, a lot of the medical research has been around kind of treatment for cancer and the side effects of cancer treatments. So as you say, chemotherapy, but also, kind of secondary conditions, like if you've been given a cancer diagnosis, there's a good chance you're going to be quite anxious about that. And, we have seen countless medical studies which show that CBD will reduce anxiety in people suffering with it, no matter what the reason, whether it can be from, even things like they've been giving CBD to people who have Parkinson's and then getting them to do essentially, kind of public speaking exercises and then recording the level of anxiety and tremors and, things like that. And they have seen, and proven or found the data to suggest that CBD will reduce anxiety in these situations. So for a lot of people, CBD can be taken as a kind of general wellness supplement, but for a lot of people, they are taking it to deal with a lot of kind of specific issues. And I think anxiety is probably one of the biggest ones. I've got a friend who's a teacher and she suffers with anxiety and the stress of the job. And I sent her some CBD, and she says, she basically said, this has changed my life, because I used to get really worried about kind of assessments and kind of, the feedback loop within teaching. It's, it's a very stressful job. And all of a sudden she feels like she's really in control of that kind of anxiety that she has and that kind of stress and pressure from the job. And she feels that she can now perform better. So yeah, I think there are countless studies being done into what CBD can do. A lot of that kind of research is in its infancy, and a lot of the studies will conclude that yes, the outcomes from this are positive, but more research needs to be done. But that kind of early research that we're seeing is hugely positive. There are, like I say, countless uses for CBD, but I think personally, and from what we see in terms of people reading Leafie, I find that the three most common are anxiety, sleep, and pain.
Yeah, it's a good all-rounder. As far as you gave an example of Parkinson's disease, which, as far as I'm aware, is a neurological disease, which obviously affects the physical, and then anxiety, which is psychological, which again can affect the physical, and then obviously you have disease, which from anxiety, dis-ease, and then obviously disease can manifest from that. So that's I must say, as a lorry driver, sometimes I work night shift constantly. Sometimes maybe on shift 4, things aren't going quite right, I'll put a little bit of CBD oil underneath my tongue, because obviously it doesn't contain the thing that can get your license taken away, which is the THC, which is, what was it? Could you just define that THC again?
Yeah, tetrahydrocannabinol. That's
right. That's the one, because we are tested quite regularly as well, as it should be. You're in charge of a sort of 34-ton slow moving missile. You don't want to be drunk or stoned. So I'm all up for that. But the CBD oil, and especially these days with anxiety being on the up, that's very good. What is Leafie's stance? And I'm really glad we started off with the CBD oil, because that to me is far more important than moving into the next subject. But I have asked your permission, can we talk about this? So what is Leafie's stance on the, well, let's define first of all, what is the difference between decriminalisation, legalisation of the use of cannabis in society? What's Leafie's stance on this particular subject? And we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, to define...
In the UK, sorry, Liam, in the UK.
Well, I mean, in the UK, obviously we're UK focused, but it's a global issue. But yeah, the difference between decriminalisation and legalisation. So decriminalisation is removing the threat or risk of prosecution for possessing of cannabis. So if a police officer stops you on the street and you have cannabis on you, regardless of what you're using it for, there is, unless you have a prescription there is a risk that you can be fined, you can be cautioned, or you could even be taken to court, prosecuted, and in theory, you can be sent to prison. So decriminalisation is removing the threat or risk of prosecution from the individual. There's a stat that says that they reckon that 1.4 million people in the UK are using cannabis illegally, without a prescription for medical reasons. So all of those people risk losing their jobs, their housing, their education opportunities, and even their freedom of liberty, right? And that's not fair. I mean, if we kind of create a situation where, let's say that they criminalized ibuprofen tomorrow, you would then, if you still needed ibuprofen to treat whatever illness you've got, you would have to go and buy it on the black market. You wouldn't know how much, now when you go and buy an ibuprofen, there's 200 milligrams in each tablet, you can take 2 or 3 of them safely to relieve the pain for a certain period of time. You know that you're not going to accidentally get paracetamol, which you might be allergic to. you know that you're going to definitely get 200 milligrams. You know that you're going to get it at a fair price and at a fairly fixed price. But if you make ibuprofen illegal, you don't know what you're getting. You could be getting a soda tablet which has anything in it, from paracetamol to fentanyl, which is deadly. And essentially, what we're doing at the moment is we're criminalizing these 1.4 million people who essentially are using cannabis for medical purposes, but also criminalizing people who might just want to use it for kind of personal enjoyment. So decriminalization is removing that risk, but still leaving the supply chain in the hands of people who might not necessarily really care about your health and well-being. So you could be buying, when you go and buy cannabis off the street or off a dealer, you don't know what strength that cannabis is. They could tell you it's one strain, it could be another. We recently published a news article about Endorse, which is a Welsh drug testing service where people can send in samples of their drugs, and they did some analysis of vape cartridges that were supposed to contain THC, and a high percentage of them contained synthetic cannabinoids, which are they're bad for you. They are dangerous. They have incredibly risky side effects. Some of them didn't contain anything. Some of them contain nicotine. Now, I've never ever touched nicotine in my life. I don't want the risk of buying something I think contains cannabis and THC to contain nicotine. It's an addictive drug. I've managed to avoid it all my life. And I've never been addicted to smoking. I don't want to run that risk, and it's not fair that I do. So if we decriminalize, yes, we remove the risk for those individual users, it's a nice place to be for the end user, but they still have to go through a legal means to purchase their products and buy them off people who might not necessarily be, kind of taking care of the supply chain. If we legalize cannabis, what we actually do is we control the whole supply chain. So from production to sale, we can make sure that people are growing it to the standards that they say they are. We can say that it's lab tested and checked for contaminants and mold and, kind of pesticides. We can say, this is this strain, and you can verify that. You can see the strength, what you're buying. So some people might want a higher concentration of CBD to THC in their product. And obviously the other kind of benefit of legalization is we can prevent minors access to a product which really they shouldn't be having, hands on. So by legalizing, decriminalizing is all very well and good, but legalizing, we have complete control, we have safety, we have protection of minors and people who are vulnerable at risk, but also we're taking that money out of the hands of people who are essentially involved in a criminal supply chain. So, this kind of, there's a lot more to be said for legalization, and I think the benefits of it outweigh kind of the negatives that the mainstream press, or the right-wing press at least, the kind of your Daily Mails, your Expresses, the hysteria that they say that, of all these negative side effects of creating an adult access market, the benefits are vast in comparison to essentially what is just a money-grabbing headline.
Okay, I'll take America for an example. It's my understanding that the courts and local government bodies in Vermont approved a bill in mid-January 2018 to allow the use of recreational marijuana and for medical use. I also believe this to be the first state in America to have progressed in this field. Now, there are many states in America that have allowed the open sale of this drug for recreational and medical use, but here in Europe, progressively so. But here in Europe, Amsterdam, as far as I know, has been the only one so far, and it's been very liberal in its policy towards the sale of cannabis for many years now. Are there other European countries that you are aware of that are moving with that progression to either decriminalizing or legalizing, or basically making a stance, this is never going to happen?
I mean, yeah. So it's kind of two things in there I'd like to respond to. So
yeah, go for
yes,
it.
America's progress has been great, but I think I'm always keen to point out that actually it's Uruguay who started this all off, really, back in 2013. I think they changed their law, and then 2014, and Uruguay went down the route of selling cannabis through, I think, pharmacies mainly, but it has to be a registered outlet. It's kind of government controlled, and it's quite a socialisty way of doing it. So they did that in 2014. I think it came into action. Canada then followed suit, and then America. Obviously, America's the headlines because it's a big country, and we kind of look at them as kind of being like a bigger brother or kind of a bigger cousin, or however you want to look at it. Aside from America, you've just had Mexico just legalized cannabis. Kind of a weird one that the laws have changed because no one really challenged it or challenged someone's argument that it was never illegal. But anyway, but closer to home, so cannabis has been decriminalised all drugs have been decriminalised in Portugal for a while now, with great effect. It's been a real kind of positive impact on their public health. Spain for a while have had kind of decriminalised cannabis laws. I lived there for a while, and it's kind of a bit of a weird law, but you're allowed to consume cannabis in private. You're not supposed to consume it in public. You're allowed to grow your own plants as long as no one can see them. And also they have these kind of cooperatives where essentially you sign up for a club, and then that club grows cannabis on your behalf, and then you can go into that club and smoke it in private, out of sight of public. As you say, Holland have very famously had a policy of tolerance towards the public consumption of cannabis. Their laws have always been a bit weird, so it's kind of for a person to have cannabis on them and consume it is fine, but the actual supply chain was always illegal. But they're actually looking to now tidy that up. Again, this is kind of an argument against the kind of decriminalisation, because the supply chain in Holland has always been run by organised crime gangs, and then they've supplied the coffee shops who supplied the end users. And now what they're trying to do in Holland is trying to tidy that up and issue licenses for the production and supply. But in terms of actual legalisation, we've got Luxembourg, who have, I think this year, maybe, it's been on the cards for a couple of years now, but Luxembourg are going to open up their adult market, but only to residents, so they don't become another Amsterdam or another Holland. And Switzerland, I mean, this one's really interesting. So what Switzerland are doing is very Swiss and efficient. So they're starting a trial where 5,000 adults get essentially a license to buy cannabis, and they go into dispensary type outlets. And then there's going to be kind of surveys and studies done into the kind of the health impact on those 5,000 people, but also kind of the wider societal impacts. And at the end of that study, they're going to decide whether, the benefits have been there and, the benefits outweigh the negatives, and decide whether to kind of legalize cannabis on a kind of national level. So we've got all of these countries locally, compared to England, kind of progressing. I know that Germany has some elections coming up at the end of this year, and cannabis is a hotly discussed subject and a hot topic. And what's happening in Germany is, I think, kind of generally the middle classes are all looking at cannabis and going, look, we're not really that bothered about this. We're kind of, generally speaking, we're quite happy for this to be progressed to let adults make the decision. And I think if Germany does go ahead and kind of open up some sort of legal market for adults, the rest of Europe will follow. I know in France, there's a kind of a big movement. Italy have got kind of a weird market where they allow the sale of cannabis, but as long as it's kind of under a certain level of THC, quite weak level. So it's essentially CBD rich cannabis. That kind of had some challenges and has been back and forth. But, generally speaking, you can go into a shop and buy essentially what they call cannabis light. So a lot of Europe is changing its rules. And I think the only thing holding the UK back is, again, as I say, kind of what the Express and the Mail and the Telegraph think.
Okay, then let's move to the hard line here. In your opinion, whether it be your own opinion or Leafie's opinion, what would be the benefit to not necessarily this order, but all of these answered, the judiciary, economically and socially, if it was, and what would that be? Decriminalise or legalisation? Take as long as you need.
I mean, let's start with the judiciary. I can't remember the exact number in the UK, but the amount of hours wasted essentially on, kind of stopping people, searching them, and then essentially sometimes prosecuting them. I think it was somewhere around 13 million at the last estimate. So that's a vast amount of money that the police are wasting, but also police time. And also, Liam, 13 million. What's that? 13 million arrests? No, 30 million pounds. Sorry, like the cost of actually, prosecuting essentially small scale. And a lot of police forces now in the UK have started, looking at alternatives. So quite a few. There's the West Midlands, Durham, I think. They're kind of, their police chief and crime commissioners have said, look, let's try and look at cannabis in a different way. And I think in West Midlands is the one that's proven to be the most successful, where instead of, they call them diversion schemes. So if they stop, say, a young lad on the street with, a small amount of cannabis, 3, 4, 5 grams, instead of putting him through the court system, giving him a caution, which might prevent him getting a job and therefore mean that he's probably more likely to turn to legal means of making money. They put them through a system of like kind of education or rehabilitation. It's taking people out of that process of being prosecuted and put through the courts, and then obviously getting a black mark against their name, which might affect their future chances. So we're already kind of reducing that. But I think for me, the benefits of full legalization are huge. So again, as I mentioned recently, by controlling the supply chain, we take money out of the hands of criminals or criminal gangs. We have control over the safety, the quality, the strength. We take the kind of risk of kids getting their hands on it by, if we look at kind of alcohol and tobacco regulation, essentially with alcohol and tobacco, which are far, far more dangerous, not just to the individual user, but to society as a whole. We don't need to, we can see people fighting in the streets every weekend when the pubs and clubs are open. And that's, that's the harms of alcohol to society. So by legalizing, we free the police up to do something better, which is, by making cannabis safer, we have more control over the strength, the quality, and therefore we take pressure off the health services. By kind of controlling the supply, and as I say, kind of looking at cannabis and tobacco and alcohol, with those we kind of made mistakes. So in the 50s and 60s, advertising and access was easy. Even in the 90s when I was a kid, I could walk into a shop, age 14, buy as much cheap cider as I wanted, get my mates 20 Benson and Hedges, go down the park and get absolutely shit canned. But as from there to now, like, I know full well that my son, who is 9, won't now be able to go and get himself an alcoholic beverage from a shop or a bar until he's 18 because of the way that we've changed the policies. And therefore he is less at risk of that harm. So we've learned these lessons from far more damaging substances. So we can apply the lessons that we've learned from those to the regulated supply of cannabis, making sure that when people do access it, it's kind of safe. It stops it getting into the wrong people's hands. And obviously, the tax revenue can be put into the public health situation. The benefits are huge. And one thing that kind of always pops into my mind when I think about this, and people, and I know you've got kind of a question around this, but I'll kind of flag it now. But people always kind of say, well, isn't cannabis likely to lead to psychosis? One of the policies that I only learned this a few weeks ago when I was doing a bit of research into what the different political parties in the UK thought about cannabis. And the Green Party have an excellent manifesto on CBD, cannabis, medical cannabis, etc. And one of the things that they put in their manifesto is that any cannabis product would have a minimum 1% of CBD in it. And the reason that they say this is because the psychosis argument is that high THC cannabis can cause, in some people with mental health issues or vulnerabilities, can cause problems. And yeah, there's a weak link, a difference between correlation and causation, but there is probably a link there, and there's a risk that we need to think about and mitigate it. But what CBD does is it mitigates that risk of psychosis. I mean, CBD is an antipsychotic. So by making sure that all cannabis products have a certain level of CBD in it, we can create an ecosystem where those harms are mitigated and pre-considered, and with a system of regulation where we make sure minors haven't got access, and maybe minors aren't seeing advertising, and even within CBD, we have rules that say you can't have minors vaping CBD or in imagery, and you can't make health claims and things like that. So it would be really easy to build a market which is safe and controlled, and actually reduces the harm and reduces the pressure on the police and court system and reduces pressure on the NHS. It's really not that hard to do. So we are, and I am, we're pro-choice, we're pro-regulation, we're pro-control. Personally, I'd love to see the cannabis club kind of system implicated, which is kind of similar to what they have in Spain, where you can become a member of a club and that club grows the plants for those members, and they essentially can go into that club and pick up, their portion of that plant. So, they might do a cycle of plants every 3-4 months, and everyone gets, kind of a couple of ounces off that plant. And in that club, you can go and consume cannabis in a safe environment with your friends and, talk shit and eat crisps. But it's not a very capitalist model, so I wouldn't expect that to come to fruition with the current leadership.
Let me just touch on what you said. You're absolutely right. I was going to, and you very nicely answered that. That was going to be the elephant in the room as far as I was concerned, about leading to harder drugs and also, as importantly, psychosis. So I'm really pleased you approach that straight away, because that is really important. And so, Liam, economically, if cannabis became legalized, economically, because at the moment, because of Brexit, we don't really have a manufacturing here in the UK. And I'm not going to say we're just going to supply the world's cannabis, but in your opinion, what would be the benefits economically for Britain?
Well, I mean, just to pick up on something you just said there about us not exporting cannabis, not a lot. Well, it depends on how educated you are in the world of cannabis, but the UK is actually the world's largest exporter by a long way of medical cannabis. Yeah. So I mean, we're talking like vastly bigger than any other country. So, and this is why a lot of activists in the UK get kind of really angry about the current status quo. So the UK is the biggest exporter of medical cannabis in the world, by a long stretch. And so there's only a handful of people who have the licenses, and I'm not going to get kind of too conspiracy theory on you, but if you go and do the research about how these people got these licenses, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So yeah, just to kind of counter that, we could well be the biggest exporter of recreational cannabis in the world as well. We have an amazing farming industry. We have a lot of technological know-how. We have the land, we have the space, we have farmers desperate to make money post-Brexit, post-COVID. We have an industry desperate for money and jobs. If we focus on the UK though, I think the value of the UK cannabis black market's around 2-3 billion, something like that. So I think the estimates were around somewhere between 200 and 500 million in tax revenue. So we have created this vacuum of revenue within the UK. Regardless of how you voted for Brexit, we are in the shit a little bit, and COVID has amplified that. I'm not going to lay the fault straight at Brexit's door, but it hasn't helped. And we have a ready-made industry. So, this isn't an industry that would need to be nurtured. As I say, if we just look at the people consuming illicit or illegal cannabis for medical reasons, 1.4 million currently doing it. If you think 1.4 million are doing it, think about the millions that could be doing it but don't want to, because they don't want to break the law. Could be teachers, it could be nurses, it could be doctors, it could be, people who have jobs where they can't risk getting caught with, even if it's just a small amount of cannabis to relieve their back pain or their anxiety, etc. So, if we kind of take an average of these estimates, I don't know, it could be millions. And for me, like I say, it's a ready-made market. So it wouldn't need to be like, within 5 years, this market could be worth. You open this market up tomorrow and people will be queuing up to buy cannabis because it's legal. And it kind of baffles me that we can be the biggest exporter of medical cannabis. We can have, we have an amazing kind of agricultural industry within the UK. We have loads of space. We also have an environmental crisis on our hands, and hemp is incredibly great at kind of sequestering CO2, removing toxins from soil, improving soil health. It's fast growing. It's you can get kind of 2 or 3 crops at least a year outdoor. Why are we not looking at this in more depth?
We'll be right back after this message.
Hi, I'm Morgan from BlameKevin.com. Car won't start and late for work? World pandemic? Maybe you forgot your mom's birthday. Or, mercy me, you are one of the unclean and forgot your wedding anniversary Again, here at blamekevin.com, we can provide you with believability, tailor-made, watertight, and certified excuses of why anything wasn't your fault. Because it was Kevin's. Use the promo code SlickPodcast21 to get a huge 5% discount on your first "Why, it wasn't me" get out of jail free card. Whatever and however the hammer falls, we got you back. It has to be blamekevin.com.
The Slick Podcast. The Slick Podcast. Yeah, it's a Slick Podcast. Truly unforgettable topic. This is Slick Podcast.
And we're back. Today my guest is Liam O'Dowd from the organisation Leafie, and we are talking legalisation or decriminalisation of cannabis here in the UK. Am I right in saying some countries make biodiesel out of it and they make cloth out of it, and back in the day, maybe over 100 years ago, used to make paper, and some of that is still around because it's almost has an unlimited shelf life, hemp paper.
So one of the things that that's kind of baffling about the UK industry. So if we kind of remove THC-rich cannabis out of the equation and look at CBD and hemp, at the minute, our current laws state that if you are a farmer growing hemp, you first off have to apply for a license, which is costly but not ridiculous. I think it's about £500. You have to jump through quite a few hoops to show that you're going to grow the hemp in a kind of location that's shielded from the public. I guess that's to stop kids wandering into the field in the dead of night, chopping a load down, thinking they're going to get, a cheap thrill. But then, and this is the craziest thing. So when you grow the plant and it's ready for harvest and processing, you have to throw away the flowers, which is essentially the most cannabinoid rich part of the plant. So if you're growing hemp in the UK to make CBD, the bit that has the most CBD in it has to be destroyed. So you're only allowed to process the seeds and the stalks. So we have this absolutely crazy scenario where, even though we have a CBD industry alone that is worth, they reckon this year, 690 million, and that's the consumer market. Most of the CBD oil and products that we sell in the UK are imported from Europe because it is not economical, or it's not competitive for hemp farmers in the UK to grow the product, process it here to make the CBD that people are buying. So even if we take this illegal market out of the equation, and this is being addressed, to be fair, people have pointed out the kind of the absurdity of it. We have this industry that wants to grow this plant and process it, but can't, because we have these archaic laws which say that they have to, when they grow the plant and product, they have to remove the most valuable bit and destroy it before they process it. So we're really kind of shooting ourselves in the foot here. Take cannabis as a drug out of the market, or as a recreational product out of the equation, and just look at the current scenario with hemp and CBD, and we're leaving millions on the table.
So with the people that have the licenses in the UK, their product is purely for recreational use, and I'm guessing it would just be bagged, tagged. And you said we are or certainly one of the biggest exporters or growers of recreational cannabis. Is that correct? Did I hear you right?
Not recreational, medical.
Okay, medical, right? Okay, let's define. I know what medical means, but what would be the difference of that product? Somebody seeking it for medical, is that CBD, or smoking it for medical? Taking into account, not everybody wants to go down that route and start smoking. What's the difference between medical cannabis and recreational cannabis?
In theory, nothing. So many of the medical strains that are grown are basically, they are all derived. So you've probably heard the term skunk thrown around, and it was kind of a name. So skunk was a strain that was grown by growers who grew cannabis for recreational enjoyment. And many of the medical strains now, even though they're given fancy medical brand names, are derivatives of skunk number 1, which was a strain that was grown for enjoyment. So the difference between medical, really, if you're being cynical about it, is the profit and the price. Yeah. In terms of, kind of narrowing what's the difference between what we grow and export for medical. So basically it's grown in greenhouses. I think the biggest is in Norfolk somewhere, but don't quote me on that. And it is exported to medical companies with licenses to either process it into a product or a preparation. So within the UK, there's a couple of products that are licensed for issuance on the NHS, and then there's many that aren't licensed but have approval. But yeah, really, it comes down to semantics, and the only difference is the medical stuff is grown in the way that a legal recreational market would be if we allowed it. So it's grown in a warehouse to probably, I assume, good manufacturing processes, good standards. It's probably checked along the way for kind of, pesticides, mold, fungus, etc. Although there has been instances of people who do get medical cannabis in the UK at the moment, they have been receiving like a small batch that had contaminants in it. So, it's still not a perfect supply chain. But yeah, it's probably just grown in a warehouse, and then, like you say, it's tracked. The amount that they've grown is then put into laboratory conditions to be processed, or it's just bagged up and sold as a medical product, probably for a much vaster price and profit.
Let's touch on socially now. You said that you're a non-smoker, so fair play to you. I smoke tobacco. Wish I didn't, but I do. So how would somebody take cannabis? How would somebody take cannabis? They wouldn't have to suddenly take up smoking to either gain medical benefit. Let's just leave CBD out of it at the moment, or would they have to suddenly adopt smoking a pipe, or taking smoking to the lungs, which, even though I'm a smoker, but absolutely not endorse at all. So what would be the benefit, do you think, socially? Is it just the illegal cannabis users now, or would there be some other way that people could, air quotes, enjoy it?
So I don't have the exact number to hand, but in states in the US where adult cannabis access for pleasure has been, legalized, or it may have been Canada, it's something along the lines of 60% of people who consume cannabis don't smoke it. So, we're not, if we legalize cannabis, again, it's, this media hysteria that all of a sudden the streets are going to be filled with weed smoke and people walking around with red eyes is nonsense. And as we've seen in sort of the US and Canada specifically, people are consuming cannabis in different ways. So edibles, so kind of sweets and cakes that have, again, a controlled amount of THC, so you know exactly how much you're getting. Beverages, and this is, I think this is, it would be quite an interesting market here in the UK. We have a completely different drinking culture to North America and those regions. But kind of, you can get a canned beverage which has 10, 15, 20 milligrams of THC in it. You can sip that while your mates drink a beer. You can end up having your own little buzz and your own little enjoyment without kind of the risks of liver damage, etc. People vaporizing it, so whether it be dry herb vaporizers or liquids. There's other administrations like transdermal patches, which kind of slow release THC into you. So if you're thinking of consuming THC to relieve some sort of pain, maybe that would be quite an interesting way of taking it. And then there's other kind of really novel things, like there's some brands in the US that have created like little soft like kind of like chews or like mints or sublingual like kind of strips that dissolve under the tongue and deliver kind of fast access. So this idea that if we legalize cannabis, all of a sudden you're gonna have to learn to skin up a joint and you're gonna be walking down the street blazing, it's bullshit. There's so much innovation.
That wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be good at all. Okay, how about the laws then? Do you think that you could treat taking cannabis? As I said, I'm a lorry driver, and like all lorry drivers, plane pilots, train drivers, we can't go to work drunk, and we sure as hell can't go to work stoned. So would you adopt the same laws for cannabis as you would for alcohol, or would you need to be more stringent? I couldn't see less stringent, but more stringent. Do you think? I guess I'm going to the thing. I wouldn't have a beer any less than maybe 13 hours before my next shift. So when I come home during the week, I don't have a can of beer. You know, I work nights. It doesn't really have time. Maybe 12 hours at the most I've got, but I've got to sleep in between then. So what would you think the law should be on that if it's legalized?
Yeah, I mean, I think there would have to be some sensible kind of regulation and guidelines around that. You know, like you say, I don't want to see people, you know, careering down the motorway and, like you say, a wheel-based missile, you know, completely off the tits. But you know, there's definitely, you know, there would definitely have to be some sort of regulation involved around that. That's not up for me to decide, and you know, I'm not a scientist. But again, you know, there's plenty of studies being done into THC impairment on you know, kind of motor functions and alertness, etc. The current way that the police do cannabis testing, which is swab testing, is not fit for purpose. So I can consume cannabis on Saturday and still have, you know, kind of traces of endocannabinoids and THC in my system today. I'm definitely not impaired by the brownie I ate on Saturday. You know, there's no two ways about it. Again, you know, there's going to be ways that we can test whether someone is currently under the influence, and whether that is, you know, impeding their ability to be a danger, or if it's creating a danger to other people. And I fully endorse that. You know, I don't expect the, you know, a legal market to open up and then everyone just be allowed to go around doing what they want, you know, stoned off the tits. But, you know, again, if we look at alcohol, you know, we've already learned from this much worse drug, because it is a drug. Let's not beat about the bush. Alcohol is a drug, and it's a dangerous one, and it's damaging. I like a beer, I like a glass of wine, but it's a damaging drug. You know, there's no two ways about it. You know, the benefits to society are far outweighed by the harms, and I think cannabis is when you look at the scale of harm, cannabis is way lower. But you know, it would be, you know, we would be remiss to not put some sort of system in place to make sure that people aren't using cannabis and then being either a threat or a danger to themselves and other people in society. But that can be easily be done. You know, it's not impossible. We have the methods to do it, and you know, it can be and should be implemented.
How long is well, actually, two questions. One, does cannabis make you hallucinate, and how long is cannabis impeding on your, if it does, judgment? I'm going back to the lorry driving or being a pilot, because it's obvious with alcohol. I suppose we've had it so long, you know, 12 hours at the very least from your last drink, depending that you're not obviously unable to walk, but at least 12 hours. So what would be your opinion for cannabis? A, does it make you hallucinate? And when would you come around to having your senses back? And I don't mean to be derogatory about that. I just genuinely am interested.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really think cannabis makes you hallucinate in the strict sense of, you know, compared to say psilocybin mushrooms or LSD, etc. But you know, there's no two ways about it. It does impair you, impair your judgment, and it can impair your reaction times. But you know, I would say that it's subjective to every individual user. I know people who can function at a high level after consuming what I would consider to be a debilitating amount of cannabis. So the way to do it, and the sensible way to do it, as is with everything, is to look at the data. And to say that we don't have the data is nonsense. You know, people have been consuming cannabis for thousands and thousands of years, and even in modern terms, studies have been done on cannabis and indeed on its impairment or on its impact on our functions as a human being. So that data exists, and more of that data could easily be gathered very, very quickly. And there is plenty of research being done on it as we speak. You know, it is an ongoing field of research. So the sensible thing would be look at the data, find what is a comfortable, you know, average for, you know, the impairment. Probably, like you say, maybe 12 hours. You know, I've gone to bed drunk and woke up drunk, but I've never gone to bed stoned and woke up stoned. But that's just my personal experience, and you wouldn't create a law based on that personal experience. You'd look at the data, you'd do the studies, you'd do more testing, you'd find what is probably a good average and maybe compensate for a little bit more, and then you'd find a way to test for that. Again, we have masses of data that we can already analyze. We have incredibly advanced scientific methods for creating testing and for understanding how cannabis works within our system, and it wouldn't take much to work out a policy. I'm sure in the US and Canada they've already found these, they've experimented with different ways of doing so, and there's other countries in the world that have kind of opened up markets, and it's doable.
Could you see cannabis? Well, actually, let's define first of all, his last couple of questions before we wrap up. Just define, is there a difference between cannabis and marijuana, or are they just the same thing?
No, they're just names. So cannabis is the species name of the plant, and marijuana is a term of, I think, Mexican origin, really, but it became popular probably as part of a big anti-cannabis campaign, and it's very much stemmed from kind of racist xenophobia. Essentially, what the anti-cannabis campaign was essentially saying was that they used a foreign-sounding word to make it sound more dangerous, because they were trying to perpetuate this myth that cannabis was a drug used by kind of Black and Hispanic men to lure and prey on kind of vulnerable white girls, and that it was kind of a threat to society, and by making it sound exotic, it made it sound more dangerous and made people associate it with this threat from the coloured man who's going to come and take our precious Christian white girls, and which was of course all bullshit. There's a few really good books on that that if anyone's listening wants to kind of have a look at. There's one called Dope Girls, and it looks at the UK's relationship with cannabis, and they essentially echoed what was going on in America, and they portrayed the jazz clubs of London as a dangerous place where black jazz musicians were basically stealing white women off the street and taking them away. But then it kind of got, in America, it kind of got reclaimed by the kind of, the 60s, 70s movement. But marijuana is more of an American term, I think. I don't really use it that often personally. I think in the UK, we've got, 100 terms for weed, bud, cannabis. It's just another name, basically. There's no difference. It's just a colloquialism, maybe, I guess.
So we talked about, and you explained very well my concern, everybody's concern about psychosis. So, like I said, last couple of questions. In your opinion, I know you draw on not just, you draw on a lot of data from other people, and obviously you're well read. In your opinion, is cannabis or could cannabis be addictive?
Not in the traditional sense of addiction. Drugs like heroin and especially cocaine, crack cocaine, they work on your body to create a physical need for more of that substance, and other opiates as well. Is it addictive in the sense that people can get addicted to things? Yes. Some people are more at risk of addiction, but people are at risk of addiction of anything, kind of eating disorders, going to the gym too much. There's an addiction called pica where people eat sponges or things that they shouldn't eat, like gravel. Some people have a susception to addiction regardless of what it is. But people get addicted to gambling, and we still have gambling adverts on television around football, essentially preying on people who are more susceptible. And again, with cannabis, we can mitigate those risks. And we can look at, there are going to be vulnerable people who fall through the cracks, like there are with anything, but they're already falling through the cracks. They're already getting addicted to cannabis, but they're being given unfettered access to an illegal market, given access to high strength products with no CBD in them or very little CBD in them, which put them more at risk. By creating a legal market, we can, mitigate those risks, and then we can use some of the tax revenue from that to create a healthcare system that allows for them to get the treatment that they need, which at the moment they don't, because they're in an illegal market. So, is it addictive? for most people, no. For 99% of people who probably consume cannabis, it is an addictive substance. For the 1% of people who have a vulnerability, and addiction, I mean, again, I could do an hour on addiction, but addiction stems from trauma in the majority of cases. And for those people who've suffered some form of trauma and therefore have a predisposed to being addicted to something, cannabis is a potential route of addiction. Yeah, but then, like I say, so is, there's people who go to the gym too much. There's people who eat sponges. There's people who, will end up on heroin and crack. These are unfortunate kind of byproducts of the society we live in. And by pretending that everyone's going to get addicted to cannabis, we're letting those people who are at risk of addiction, whether it's cannabis or something else, we're letting them down, I think.
Where do you think we are realistically with the legalisation or decriminalisation of cannabis in the UK? Could you ever see it happening in the next 50 years?
50 years, yeah, I hope so. I mean, so since I've been I've always been kind of interested in drugs and drug policy, and kind of, society's relationship with them. It's been kind of an ongoing hobby, I suppose, of mine, subject, for various reasons. But since I really got involved in CBD in the cannabis world, for me, there's a bit of an ongoing joke where people always say we're 4 years away. We were 4 years away 3 or 4 years ago. So I don't know, but from the inside, for a lot of people, it can seem frustrating, and they can say that we're not making progress, we're behind. Looking at kind of countries around the world that are changing their rules and getting frustrated, and it's understandable. That frustration is kind of it's born out of real challenges. But I don't know if you saw, but earlier in the year, Sadiq Khan, as part of his re-election campaign as London Mayor, said that he was going to look at setting up a kind of study into whether there would be a benefit to London of essentially decriminalising cannabis. Now, you've got a lot of hoops to jump through, but the fact that an elected leader is putting that in his manifesto and then getting elected is positive. We do have greater access to medical cannabis, albeit with some frustrations, and that, again, in the past 2 years has been positive. We are seeing influential countries around the world, changing their rules. If the US takes a federal approach of legalizing cannabis, which it's quite likely to do now with the current leadership, then that puts pressure on the UK. And again, as I say, if Germany do kind of legalize cannabis for adults in the next kind of year or two, again, that puts a lot of pressure on Europe as a whole. And I think, as I say, I think if we see Germany do it, then we'll see other countries follow suit. But aside from that, we've already got sort of a lot of de facto decriminalisation, with police forces choosing to divert small-scale cannabis possession. We've got medical cannabis card schemes like CanCard, where people who can't afford private prescriptions can register for this card, and if they can prove that they have a legitimate claim for, possessing cannabis for medical use, they can present this card to the arresting officer, and that officer hopefully has been briefed to say, look, people with this card they're in possession of cannabis for a medical reason. So it's up to you, but use your discretion whether you want to pursue, kind of cautioning or arresting. So we're making tentative steps, but it's hard to say. As I say, the current leadership, I'm not going to get too political on you, but 10 years ago, Boris Johnson was recorded on video saying that, as far as he was concerned, his neighbours smoking weed in their back garden weren't a threat to society. And now he's taking a hardline stance saying, oh no, I'll never do that. But I don't know. Just today, Dominic Cummings, I'm not a fan of Dominic Cummings, but he has been obviously drip feeding the public with sort of some of the feedback from, his time assisting or advising Johnson. And one of the things that hasn't really been picked up, but I read today that he said, and Johnson was quoted saying, essentially saying that the Express is my boss. So he was talking about COVID deaths, but, we've got a guy who was recorded saying that he doesn't think cannabis should be illegal and that ordinary people just smoking weed in their back garden shouldn't be prosecuted. But now he's in power, and he's openly now admitted that he makes his decisions based on what the press are going to say about him. Until that right-wing press and has, until they lose their grip on public policy, that's probably the biggest barrier, because for every step forward we take, there'll be another bullshit story about something about cannabis that comes out, and it slows the cause down. But as I say, there's so much positive, and I'd rather focus on the positive. We are making good steps. More people are getting cannabis into their hands who need it for genuine reasons. There's great kind of studies going on, like Project 2021, which is a medical study that's basically the NICE and the NHS always say we can't prescribe more medical cannabis because we don't have the data, which is probably nonsense because there's tons of data out there. But what Project 2021, which is a part of drug science, what they're doing is they're trying to collate that data that the NHS need to say, okay, you said you didn't have the data. Well, here you go. Here's the data. And they're getting medical cannabis patients to fill in surveys about the impact that medical cannabis has on their life, about the improvement in the quality of their life, about the reduction of the secondary consequences of their condition. So, whether they've got chronic pain and then they start taking cannabis to treat that chronic pain, they're actually seeing that these people are not only reducing their pain, but improving the quality of their sleep, which obviously goes on to impact your general quality of life. So there are lots of positive things being done and lots of positive movements forward. So it's a matter of when, not if, but that when is basically a massive question mark at the moment. Hopefully 2 years if we're positive, 4 if we're being negative.
I remember, this is plagiarism, by the way. I remember hearing or reading, somebody said, I'm paraphrasing probably, 6 guys in a pub drinking all day, there's going to be a fight. 6 guys smoking joints all day, they're probably going to form a band. So on that thought, last thing, don't have to answer this. How's your dad doing? Okay now, yeah?
Yeah, my dad's great.
Good.
Big fan of C.B.D. He's basically, he so he's like a working class upbringing. Used to go to the football all the time in the 70s. So, all his mates are men, and he essentially became like the kind of evangelist amongst them, getting them all on it. So, yeah, he's great. He's very much a convert, and he'll sing the praises of C.B.D. all along. And, his story is just one of millions. There's plenty of people who are consuming CBD and finding great results with it. And I think what we're seeing, because people are consuming CBD and they're getting great positive results from it, they're looking at it now and going, well, if CBD, which is essentially just cannabis without the THC, if CBD is doing me good and it's doing my mum good and it's doing, my kids good, and, everyone I know is getting benefits from it, why can't people have this one missing ingredient? Why can't we make sensible decisions about it? Why can't we be adults about it and have that freedom of choice? And like you say, for a lot of people, I think a lot of people would like to come home at the end of a stressful day at work, and instead of sitting down and popping a cork and drinking a bottle of wine and putting the weight on and, obviously the necessary liver damage and the hangover, I think people would rather come home and have a 20 milligram edible and just, use that to kick back, relax, not put so much pressure on their liver. I mean, I don't know, might end up raiding the Chris cupboard, but, me personally, I really only try and drink at the weekends when I'm, and I'll consume cannabis in the week because I can get up the next day. I've got a busy business. I've got people who we employ and I'm responsible for, and I can't be doing that with a hangover, but, eat a bit of wheat brownie on a Tuesday night and I'm ready to go Tuesday morning after a coffee. So I think a lot of people feel the same way as me now. So, it's just a case of the politicians and the press catching up with what is essentially the public opinion. I think there's only, we did a news article not long ago, and a YouGov survey, and only 32% of adults in the UK surveyed thought that cannabis should still be illegal. So, we're talking a minority now. We've left the EU on a much tighter margin.
Yeah.
So
it'll be interesting to find out or to see what happens over the next few years. I really don't know enough about this subject. As long as people's mental and physical health as well, if there's a benefit to the economy, either way, I'm all for that. But Liam, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I know you've got other subjects that you cover that I'd really appreciate if you consider coming back onto the show. But before you go, if you'd tell everybody where we can find you.
Yeah, so the website's leafie.co.uk. As I say, we're UK focused, so we're publishing news that's relevant to people in the UK and Europe. We're on most social media. If you just look for Leafie, or the handle is @Team Leafie across all channels. And my advice would be subscribe to our newsletter. We drop it in your inbox every Saturday morning. We don't spam you. We don't try and sell you anything through that. It's just a summary of our best articles. It's a great way to start your weekend, have a little read through. And yeah, just, check us out. And if anyone wants to know more, you can find us on social media. Just drop us a message, and I can tell you anything, that I know about, and I'm happy to chat to people all day long.
Liam O'Dowd, thank you.
Thanks very much.
And that was the cannabis debate with Liam O'Dowd from the online organisation Leafie. By recording this interview, I am certainly not endorsing the purchase or use of cannabis. Neither am I sitting in judgment. The interview was a debate about a subject that I, for one, find interesting, that I also think should be addressed by the British Parliament meaningfully and with integrity. Having said that, the use of CBD oil, from my own experience, has been a very positive one, and I would encourage anyone who is unsure as to the possible benefits this oil could bring to their life to visit leafie.co.uk or speak to their GP, or any site that will honestly and unbiasedly inform you of its pros and cons. Of the latter, I know of none. Should Britain legalise the use of cannabis, and in turn take the profit and violence out of the hands of the criminal gangs, and thus free up resources for our police force? And if so, should Britain's lawmakers ensure that the cannabis that would be available to all would be of the purest and best quality, with a standard practice for all producers? Would Britain's economy, judiciary and society as a whole benefit from this plant's legalisation? And so the wheel continues to turn. My thanks to Liam O'Dowd today, and for his time and well-informed opinions in making this episode. My thanks also to you, my dear listeners, for attending this cast. If you've enjoyed the episode, please give it a like and share, or subscribe. Also, if you'd be so kind. If you want to contact the show directly, then drop me an email, the slkpodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment below. But either way, please keep them kind. You can find the Simon Laurie King podcast on most platforms, including YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. And so, my friends, it's time for me to go. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, bye.
Slick Podcast. Keeping it real and always keeping it groovy.